I just want to know where your energy comes from. You know, you moved here in 1950,
Yes.
right? And were a citizen activist, as you called yourself.
Yes, yes.
Those were the ramps to nowhere, the R.H.
Yes, ramps
Thompson,
to
right?
nowhere.
Right?
Worked on that.
Then newspapers,
Yes,
then city council, 3 terms.
yes,
And now, come on, there's like the book,
yes.
and you have a radio show.
Yes, a radio show
Yeah,
on
how are
Thursday
you-
afternoons from 3 to 4 on 101.1.
And it's a great show. Look at all these possible guests you have here in the audience.
Oh, we've had some wonderful guests, marvelous guests on the show.
Thank you. That's only because we just did it, 2 weeks ago?
Yes, exactly. I was the guest on my own show. It was really quite funny.
Jean, why did you want to write this book at this time?
Well, I closed my door down at City Hall for the last time in December of 2015. It was December, and I had not done my Christmas shopping yet. And so I got up the next morning thinking that I was going to get up very early, get a shower, get dressed, and go do Christmas shopping. I had 4 days left. And unfortunately, I fainted. I made a terrible noise. Fortunately, my son was there making coffee downstairs in the kitchen, and he called 911, and pretty soon there were 6 fire people in my bathroom when I was half clad. And one of them, fortunately, was a woman, and they carted me off to the emergency ward, and I had a blocked artery, and they fixed it. But they made me spend the night at the hospital, University Hospital. Nice place, I guess, but it's very noisy. So all night long, I was hearing all this noise, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's later than I thought. I haven't done my Christmas shopping, but I haven't written the book yet. And so when I recovered, managed to get my Christmas shopping done finally, I set out and wrote the book. Took me about 7 months, I think, to write the book. It wasn't hard at all. In fact, I had a whole lot of fun reliving some of the things that had happened into Seattle in the last 4 or 5 decades. And I enjoyed that a great deal. And then I discovered that the hard part is then you have to find somebody who wants to print it for you. But I did. I found WSU Press. And they were wonderful to work with. They were just marvelous to work with one exception. They didn't like my title.
I was going to ask you, you had a different title for this book,
Yes.
right?
My working
Which
title was Confessions of a Badass Bitch. I thought it would sell a lot of books. And it really wasn't my idea. It was a stranger newspaper that called me a badass bitch, and I just decided that, well, I'll adopt that. However, WSU Press is a little bit more sedate, and they decided that Citizen Jean was a better title. And we fought about it for about a month, and finally I gave up, decided that Citizen Jean it would be.
So there needs to be a sequel, and then you can use.
Yes. Maybe
Your
I can
badassness.
next time. Well, I'm hoping that, I told an awful lot of stories, but then I remember how many stories I didn't get around to telling that still have to come.
How'd you pick the ones for this particular book?
Well, I don't know. You set out and you sit down and think, what were the important parts of all the things that people might want to know about? And you try not to be extraneous. And actually, I did have one chapter that they decided was extraneous, and they took it out. They have readers that read your book, and there were 3 readers in the first batch of people, who one of whom decided that I probably shouldn't be published at all. But the other 2 thought that I should. And then they sent it back, and 3 more readers, and they said, well, fine, but take out chapter 8. So I took out chapter 8.
What was chapter 8?
It was about grunge.
Oh, and you were a big fan, as I recall.
Well, no, not all that much, but I certainly was in the middle of it. I mean,
I know you were.
We learned a whole lot of things about life. Being on the newspaper, you learn things that opened with Kurt Cobain's ashes. There were people who wanted to know about Kurt Cobain's ashes. Where were they? I got a telephone call from Boeing. They called me up and they said, "Where are Kurt Cobain's ashes interred?" And I said, "Well, sorry, but I think they're on Courtney Love's mantle," which is where they were. She really, really wanted to have, excuse me, the ashes interred at Calvary Cemetery here in Seattle. But the Archdiocese did not like the idea. They said that if you do that, you can buy a plot, but you will have to pay $100,000 for security. And so she decided not to do that. Some years later, Kurt Cobain's ashes were scattered in a creek down in Olympia. So in case anybody ever asks you, that's where they are.
They're flowing somewhere, or they've arrived somewhere. You know, let's talk about a couple of the items in the book, a couple moments.
Sure.
My question with one of them is, did Dixie Lee Ray ever name a pig after you?
No, unfortunately, I was not that famous. Although she wasn't very happy with me, I described that she had gained quite a bit of weight while she was governor. And she appeared in this peach-colored pantsuit the day that I was down there to interview her. And, you know, she really looked like a great big gumdrop because she wasn't a very tall woman, and that was just a bit much. She didn't care for that.
Jean, when I read your section on Dixie Lee, she sounds today a bit Trump-like. Was she?
Very, very, very Trump-like. For one thing, she did not give regular press conferences because she didn't like the press. They did not treat her very well. And what she would do is she would usually go to a small town where she had sort of a base, and she would talk to some of the reporters in the small newspapers. But she did not often hold a press conference. In fact, that was why I was down there, because it was one of the unusual press conferences. But we didn't learn that much that day. What we learned was that nuclear power does not cause cancer. That was what we learned.
And this was from wasn't she head of the Atomic Energy Commission?
Yes, she had been. She thought that, you know, the atomic waste ought to be interred in the ocean, which was a rather unusual thing for a marine biologist to decide to do.
Okay, secret plot. What am I talking
Secret
about?
plot?
Secret plot. Seattle World's Fair.
That's true.
What was the plot?
Well, the plot was that Seattle did not really have a center. And the mayor at the time, Alan Pomeroy, thought that it would be a really good idea to have a World's Fair, and then you would have all this area that he could have as a city center. And of course, that is what happened right after the fair. Some of the buildings were torn down, but many of them were permanent and kept. As we know, we have the Space Needle.
Yes, we do.
We have the monorail.
Lots of other sites, yeah. Before we talk about a couple more, let's get into your career in the news biz. It began professionally at the Post-Intelligencer.
That is true.
And you were, among many things, reporter, editor. You were moved around a lot. And finally, in 1983, you become a columnist. How did you, I mean, this is a plum job, right?
Yeah. Oh, no. And I mean, they don't let you be a columnist the first time you sign up to work at a newspaper.
So how'd you get it?
Well, I think because I was a badass, possibly. I had been acting editorial page editor during the joint operating agreement litigation, because the Times and the PI were joining together. And I had been on the editorial page, and my boss left, and I became acting editorial page editor during that time. But then after the joint operating agreement was completed and the papers were joined together in advertising and circulation, they didn't know quite what to do with me. I wasn't going to be the permanent editorial page editor because the publisher and I didn't always see eye to eye. So they had to do something with me, and they made me business editor, which was not a plum job at the time, because the previous business editor was now managing editor, and he looked over the shoulder of anybody who wrote business, and used to have pitched battles in the news conference at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and pretty soon the editor got tired of our fighting, I guess, and he called me into his office one day and shut the door, and I thought, well, I'm probably going to get yelled at, because that was sort of what he did, shut the door and yelled at people. He said, how about you write a column? And he said you could, 4 days a week, you could have items, you could have a lot of fun. You wouldn't write politics, because I've got guys who could do that. And, guys do politics. And I said, well, okay, I'll try it. I'll give you, I said, when do I have to make up my mind? And he said, oh, you have a lot of time, tell me in the morning. And I went home and talked to my family about it, and I said, how would you feel about my writing a column? It might mean that I have to spend more hours, more going out evenings and so forth. And they said, what could happen if you foul up? And I said, well, I probably will. And I said, I'd probably get night cops. And they said, go for it.
Not bad. Of course, you'd be out at night with night cops too, but what the heck. Jean, when you were writing your very first column, you
Yes.
hadn't written it yet, or maybe you got some advice from another name in the city, another columnist.
Oh, I did. Emmett Watson, who was a longtime columnist, and in fact, I think probably invented the idea of a Seattle column in the first place. He was what they call an items columnist, because he would do, a couple sentences and then 3 dots and then the next thing. He was the kind of person that, Herb Keane in San Francisco, Jimmy Breslin in New York, and he used to take his friends out to lunch, and he said, I have a strong bench. He took me out to lunch, and he said, what are you going to write about tomorrow, kiddo? He called us all kid, and it made it easier that way. And I said, well, I was thinking about writing about rape relief, because the city had a program called Rape Relief, and as usual, the city budget was in bad shape, and they were going to cancel it. And I said, I think I should write about that. And he said, rape relief? And he put his head in his hands. I thought he was going to cry. He said, you don't write about rape relief. First, you entertain the troops, and then you have an opportunity to have an opinion. But first you entertain the troops. And I did change my mind, and I let somebody else write about rape relief.
Well, at the PI, you entertained the troops with your column for about 8 years. And then you did something that I think we all used to call you crossed the street. Talk about crossing the street.
Well,
and maybe even a little bit of what led to it. Because the JOA, in a way, was almost the signal of what was to come. Not just here, but in other cities across the country for newspapers.
Well, at that time, we got a directive from Hearst. The Hearst Company is the parent, of course, for the Seattle PI at the time. And at the time, they had, I believe, 10 newspapers, 10 daily newspapers around the country. And the flagship, the San Francisco Examiner, was told that they had to cut their staff 10%. And so we had the handwriting on the wall, and pretty soon we had our news conference in which our publisher, who had a broken arm at the time, by the way, had his arm in a sling. It turned out that he had been painting and had fallen off the ladder previously. And they helped him up onto the desk. And he got up onto the desk and he said, "We're going to have to cut the staff 10%. And he said that they wanted people who had been there for a while to move on and give the young ones a chance. There would be some buyouts, but if there weren't enough buyouts, they would have to have those people who were last fired. And so it was a very poignant time. You'd go into the ladies' room in the morning, and there'd be somebody in there crying and say, "I'm number 8, and I'm surely not going to make it." And I felt so bad about it. I had been there long enough so that I didn't have to worry probably about that sort of thing. But at the same time, it was just a very poignant time realizing that these people, some of whom had moved across the country to find a home in Seattle, were all of a sudden going to lose their jobs. And I thought, well, you know, at one time I had thought maybe the Times was interested in my column. And why didn't I do something about it, you know, while the getting was good? And at that point, I'd sort of, you know, figured I probably made a mistake, followed up, and I got a telephone call from the editorial page editor, Mindy Cameron, at the Seattle Times. And she said, "Would you like to have lunch with Mike Fancher next week?" And I gulped. I'm sure she probably could have heard me. What does that mean? I mean, like he just likes to have lunch with people?
He kind of did, but that's another story.
Probably so. Mike was a great guy. Anyway, I arranged to have lunch somewhere where people probably would be seeing us, and I went, and it was not only Mike Fancher, but it was Alex McLeod. And they said, "What will it take to take my column over to the Seattle Times?" And I had thought about it, and I thought, well, you probably shouldn't ask for too much, or else they won't be interested. So I thought, well, first of all, I would kind of like to have a seat in the newsroom, because it seems to me that you can't write the kind of column that I did with items, different things, unless you're, you know, part of the news operation and hear what's going on. And then I would like to have my 4 weeks of vacation, which I had worked my way up to. Newcomers had to only get 2 weeks, and then you finally got 4 weeks, and I would like to keep that. And then I would like to be paid as much as the men. And I knew because I was a union member and had been working in the union office that all of the male columnists at the PI got more money than I did. Not an enormous amount more, because they don't pay newspaper people all that much, but they were all paid better. And so Mike and Alex agreed that, yes, I could have my 4 weeks vacation, and yes, they would pay me as much as the men. The hard part would be finding me a seat in the newsroom, because they had hired quite a few people, and it was kind of a packed newsroom, as you may remember at the time.
Yes, yeah. Well, and what we, you know, what is it called, fair disclosure, you and I worked together.
Yes.
For a long time.
Yes.
About 20 years.
Yes.
Including some other faces in this room right now who are.
Yes, we're lucky enough to be in the midst of friends.
Well, maybe. Let's see what they say afterward. Okay, you come to the Times.
After they read the book, they may
exactly. Yeah, there you go. You come to the Times, and boy, within a few years, there were a couple, and I kind of found these chapters in your book a bit more emotional than some of the others. It was the battle in Seattle,
yes,
which was rather devastating in a lot of ways, including for those who covered the story, and then the newspaper strike.
Oh yes, that was very poignant.
That was a tough one, Jean, and you took on a different role during that period too. Would you talk about that a bit?
Yes, I did. I was a good union member and had been, and in fact, it even had, sort of a role there in the executive committee. But I had not been a spokesperson until they had appointed spokespersons for the union to do the negotiating. And at that time, they appointed Dave Horsey, and let's see, who else? Ron Judd, and I'm trying to remember, Art Teal. And they had Keiko Morris, who was a rather young, lovely African-American reporter. And she had some family illness in her family, and they had to have somebody take her place. And I guess I didn't exactly fit the demographic, but I turned out to be one of the spokespersons. And what they did was they sent me out to talk to Rotary clubs and businessmen's clubs and tell them about the strike. I was also having to write a column and also having to picket. You had to do 4 hours picket a day, 4 days a week, in order to get strike pay.
And the column you wrote for the Strikers newspaper, which was produced at the same time.
Yes. Oh, yes. The Union Record. Actually it was a very good paper, and it was amazing that they could put it together that fast, I must say.
And Jean, when the strike ended, I think as I recall, I think we called it the Great Unpleasantness, which was an understatement.
Yes,
Total
definitely.
understatement. But after that, talk about coming back and what you went through to return to work.
Yes. I must make one diversion and give credit to Patty Murray. She was the one who eventually settled the strike. She invited the people back to her office in Washington, D.C., and kept them up all night until they agreed. And one of the agreements that they made was that they would call back all of the strikers within 6 months. So some people went back right away, and some of us, the people who were spokespersons, were bad, did not get called back right away. So I got called back finally after, I believe it was 4 or 5 weeks of waiting and wondering. And what you had to do then was you had to have re-education. You had to be educated before you could come back into work. And the editor re-educated you, and among other things, they told you that the word scab was to be treated the same way as if you used an ethnic slur, and you would be fired immediately if you used that word. Of course, you could think that, and sometimes we did.
So back you came,
Yes?
and not long after, I remember thinking, I think Jean's nuts. But you decided to run for the Seattle City Council. What prompted all of that? Were you ready for it? What were you ready for at that period of life?
Well, the funny thing is that, I think we had quite a code of ethics at the Seattle Times, maybe even more so than at the PI. And ethics mattered a good deal to us. And I was working as a columnist, and I got an email in the morning, and I got an email from one of the city council members. And she said that she had raised more money than anybody else on the city council in the month of May. She had raised $1,000 a day, and at the time, that seemed an awful lot. And I thought, I wonder who's contributing to her campaign. And we do have a very open situation here in Seattle. You can find out who contributed. And so I immediately looked it up. And there was the name Carla Carcio, which immediately rang a bell. This was the owner of the strip clubs, who was, sort of the local mafia don. And I wondered why in the world she was accepting money from them. That did seem to be a bit much. I mentioned it to one of my colleagues, Steve Militich, asked him what did he know about, why would they be accepting this? Well, it turned out that there was a request at City Hall for a spot rezone for Rick's Strip Club out in Lake City. And guess who was chair of the committee? And guess who voted for it? And I was really quite aghast. I mean, it seemed to me that this was, a bit much to be accepting. It turned out that somehow or another they managed to launder money so that they had collected $30,000 from the Colacurcio family and employees, and from strip clubs as far away as Texas. Well, I was offended, and I thought, most people who worked for newspapers and covered City Hall thought they could do as good a job as anybody there. I mean, it was just sort of, and I thought, at one point I thought I could do better than they could. And maybe I waited too long. Maybe I should have done this, when I was younger and more ambitious and better looking. And then a friend of mine was coming to dinner that night, and she said, she's a political consultant. She said, I could do an overnight survey and find out whether you had a chance. And I sat there with a bunch of friends. These are all newspaper people who would not be able to support me, but they encouraged me nevertheless. I mean, go ahead, see what happens to you. Well, she came and called and said, you have 4 times more positives than the present incumbent. You could do it. And so I got up at 5:30 in the morning, wrote my letter of resignation, and all of a sudden, I was running for office. Paid my $850, which, you had to, filing fee.
Yeah.
Resigned. My editor, Dave Boardman, bless his heart, gave me a big hug, and he said, we're going to be just as mean to you as anybody else. And he was right.
Okay, so here you are, and it's a public record. You were 71 years old.
Yes.
You had never run a campaign
Ancient.
before in your life. Yes, of course.
Oh, to be
You've
71
never done
again.
anything like that, never been an administrator, and you're off on the next adventure. And you won, and you won again, and you won again. 3 terms.
That's true.
That's pretty incredible.
Well, it was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity. And I must say that also, it was a revelation to find out that you didn't just tell people what to do, you could actually do it.
Okay, if you could do it, tell me what you did that you accomplished, that you thought, I'm glad I did this. What was a highlight or 2?
Oh, golly, there's so
Or
many
10.
of them. I mean, like, for instance, I was chair of the Energy Environmental Committee when City Light went carbon neutral, the first big utility in the entire country to go carbon neutral. I mean, there were wonderful things like that along the way. Then we had a wonderful agreement with the Department of Justice on our overflow, our sewer overflow, which had been going into the Sound and into the lake when we had overflows. When it rains hard, that's what happens in Seattle. But we were able to make an agreement with the Department of Justice to put in holding tanks, which there are now being done. I mean, there were many wonderful little things that you could do along the way.
Well, and among them was your constant effort, your constant encouragement and push for women.
Yes, well, that's true. I mean, we discovered, I think it was 2013 when the news came out, Seattle had the largest gap between women's wages and men's wages of anywhere in the entire country. It was 70 3 cents on the dollar. Most places why women work, I think it's April the 8th is considered the day when people's salaries, when women catch up with what men have made the year before. But in our area, it has to go until May. So why is this? Why do women here, many bright women, many women, why is it they don't get paid as much as men? And why is it such a big gap here in this city? I think, it really comes down to some of our tech jobs, some of our Boeing people get better paid. And so I became a member of a committee to see what we could do about this. What is it that's keeping women from being able to make as much as men? And we started to find out some of the things that would make a difference. One of the things was paid sick leave. And I sponsored an initiative with Nick Licata, the two of us, to have paid sick leave, which is required in the city of Seattle. These are the jobs where women can't leave because they have a cold, because they have a kid who's sick. This helps our women who are less paid, well paid. And then I worried about the fact that we did not have any paid parental leave. We did manage to get that at the city. It took us almost 2 years to do it, and I didn't shut up for the whole 2 years. But we finally did. Started out with four weeks, and it isn't only for women, but also for fathers. The fathers get to take that time as well. And now it is up to 12. And it was an infectious thing. I kept getting telephone calls from other cities to find out, how did we do it? What did we do? And I got a call from New York, also from Cleveland, and there were also private employers who also found that this was a very good thing because they were going to be competing for employees. They would have to have paid sick leave. We also worked on the $15 minimum wage, which is another thing that Seattle pioneered pretty much. Now it is becoming a talking point for some of the people who are running for office nationally.
There had to be tough moments on the council.
They were.
Was there ever a low point or not?
A low point? Well, I would say it was something of a revelation when Sama Sawant got elected, and we got cussed out every Monday morning at 8:30.
Does that continue?
Yes, as far as I know. She does tend to lecture her fellow council members. It's never enough, and she always is there to tell us so.
Well, you don't have to listen to those anymore now that you've finished your 3 terms. So you finished the 3rd term.
Yes.
And now, Jean Godden, you are a radio
Yes.
star. You and Sue Donaldson.
Yes.
Talk about this show.
Oh, well, on Thursday afternoons from 3 until 4, we have this program in which we interview people. In fact, one of my interviewees down here in Terry, too, Susan Gilmore, came and told us how it was to cover City Hall back when she was covering City Hall, and also writing one of her wonderful pieces that I remember is about the Alaskan Way Viaduct and how she found out that the workmen who were building it 50 years ago found that, they could be 3 degrees out of plumb, but, it's not necessary for government work. Wonder the thing didn't fall down.
The show, by the way, is called The Bridge.
The Bridge.
And it's 101.1
101.1 FM. And we have kind of a good listening area. We can be heard all the way from Kirkland to Federal Way, except at my house. I am right across the Sandpoint Way from the station, which is over at Magnuson Park. But we do. We have a potential of 200,000 people. Unfortunately, I don't think they're all tuned in, but they could.
What's next? I mean, you make me tired, but I've got to ask this. What are you going to do next?
I don't know. It's a good question. I have a lot of stories I still haven't told.
Is there one story?
I mean, you know, Kurt Cobain's ashes still
well,
haven't
that's true.
been.
We've already heard that one. Is there another one that you could tell us that you did not put in this book, but it just screams to be told?
Oh God, there's so many of them. How about the time that I was sitting at the city council dais, listening to a public hearing. Some of them are very interesting, and you get very interested, and you take notes. And some of them get a little bit repetitious, and you get a little bit tired. And I am sitting next to Jim Compton, you may remember.
From TV reporter,
From
right?
TV reporter, who got elected to city council before I did. And the way they line up the council members is the people with the most seniority are closest to the middle. And if you're new, you're sitting either on the far left or the far right. And I was sitting right next to Jim Compton because he'd been elected before me. And he said, well, how about, while we're sitting here, we could write a murder mystery. I will do one page and then you add a page. And we did. And we went on for quite a while, over a period of time when we were only at the very, dull parts of the public hearing. And then Jim got a little bit concerned. And he said, if somebody noticed that we're doing this and they, ask for public disclosure requests, we'll have to turn this over. So we did stop doing it. But it really got very exciting. We murdered several people. Real people.
Were the victims people we know?
Might have been.
We'll save it. Let's save it for the book. We'll save it for the next book. I want to give folks a chance to ask you some questions now that we have you here, trapped at University Bookstore. What would you like to know? Please feel free.
Trapped in a bookstore. Oh, that sounds like
great?
sounds like
It's
heaven.
another novel. There you go. That'll be your second. Whatever
Yes,
it is.
I think that's where I'd like to go.
And there are former reporters here in the room, so I'm expecting questions.
So naturally we get Oli.
Well, I enjoy your writing for the West Side Journal, I guess. How did that start? And tell us about.
Oh, well, one day the editor of the, I guess he's the publisher of the West Side Journal, West Side Seattle. It's 4 community newspapers, a combination, Ballard all the way to Burien. And he called up and said, would you like to write a column? And I said, sure, that'd be fun. And I said, what do you want? Do you want news? And he said, no, we want opinions. And I said, well, I've got a lot of opinions. So I now write a column once a week for them.
Thank you. I totally enjoy it.
Thank you.
And I completely forgot. I would have passed out if I had to list that along with your other doings these days. But that's right, the column. What else? What else?
I want to know what you're reading.
Oh, what am I reading? Well, as a matter of fact, I'm reading the library book by Susan Owens. Yes, Susan Orleans. She is a wonderful writer, and I'm enjoying it very much. And I've always got a whole bunch of books. Fortunately, my friend Susan Gilmore very often will loan me books, and we trade back and forth.
And the library book, in case you haven't heard of it, is the story of the fire at LA Central Library about the mid-'80s, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it is.
85, 86?
How you could have
Fascinating.
written a book about a library book? I mean, it's amazing, is it not?
It really is. And she's a wonderful researcher and reporter, which makes the book just engrossing. It's one of
Oh,
my
it is.
favorites
I
of
mean,
last year.
it's a detective story anyway. I mean, you find out that the library burned up, almost all their volumes, the main library, and and the ones that left had to be rehabilitated. But you don't know who did it. It was an arson, they thought.
What else? What else would you like to? Yeah.
Jean, I know this is a huge question, but I'd love to hear you just reflect on the changes in Seattle. So
Changes in Seattle? Oh my gosh.
anything you want to say?
Oh, well, I mean, when I came here, this was I came from Virginia, and I told people I was going to Seattle, and they said, well, that's going to be awfully cold. And aren't you, sort of up there next to Nome? And they really weren't being funny. Really, I mean, Seattle was not on the map for quite a while. And in fact, I can remember all these people saying, well, we're going to have this World Fair. We're going to be on the map. So, and then we're going to have the World Trade Organization is going to meet here. We're going to be on the map. We're going to be a world-class city. But when I first came here, it was not a world-class city.
Who else? That's our pet tiger who's downstairs. We let him out just about closing time. It really
Somebody
clears out
found
the
a good
store.
book.
Yeah, that's right. What else would you like to know? Anybody else?
Seattle's a very different place today. I mean, when you think about the fact that we were the ones who were counseling people in New York City about Amazon. I mean, this is outrageous.
Well, Jack Broom, would you like to ask a question?
Jean, what do you do to keep up your health and energy to be so active?
Well, I'll go down into the Y. This morning, Carol, sitting back there, and was at my Y exercise class. We have a wonderfully gorgeous instructor who makes us all feel like we're, going to look exactly like her when we get through. 7 a.m.
We've done that for how many years?
How many years have you done it, Jean?
Oh, gosh, forever. Back in the 80s, I guess, a friend of mine dragged me off kicking and screaming to do exercise with her. And we discovered we could do it at 6:30 in the morning so that we would then take our clothes in and shower and then go off to work at the PI. So I've been doing it ever since then.
I think that's one of the conversations you and I used to have about aerobic classes.
Yes.
Yeah. Whining and complaining and then getting up at 5 o'clock
Yes,
in the morning.
exactly.
Yeah.
I wonder if Jean would comment about the future of newspapers.
Oh dear, I worry so about the future of newspapers. I really do. I am very concerned. I think that we've got to have credible news sources if we're going to have a democracy, and I think that it's basic. And I worry a great deal about newspapers. I think, of course, that there will always be truth tellers. Maybe they will all have to eventually go online. Maybe we'll all get it from radio stations and TV stations. We will get it from other sources, but we've got to have good, credible news.
If I might, just to do a little sales promotion. Next Thursday, Jill Abramson, who's a former executive editor of the New York Times, will be here doing a bookstore interview and talking about her book. And it ought to be pretty interesting. I've just finished it. It's the depth and the research is pretty amazing. And the conversations about the future will, really kind of throw you for a loop. It sure did me. She's also in a little bit of trouble over some plagiarism claims. It's a week from this Thursday, next Thursday. And you can get tickets through us. Just, check our website and come on down. We're going to be there too. Yeah.
Jean, how did your experience and skills as a journalist help or hurt you when you entered elected office?
Well, it helped me in the sense that I think there the skills that you have are quite transferable. I think that you learn to research, you learn to get a real quick understanding of the situation before you write your story. And the same thing is true about being on the city council. You should do a really good research job before you take a vote. It's very important. And you should listen to people. I think it's very, very important, even though I make a joke out of the fact that Compton and I had the murder mystery. We did appreciate the fact that people come down and talk to you. The idea that they take that time, not paid, come down and just give us their opinion was very important. I must say that I am kind of distressed sometimes when I hear about council members these days don't always let people come in and talk to them about their problems. I know that I never, ever refused anybody an opportunity to come in and talk to me, even when I knew that they were going to cuss me out. But I take it back. One time I said, okay, I'm not going to listen one more time to the elephants, the people who wanted to give away the elephants.
Is there going to be a Ballard bike trail?
It's big part?
The Ballard bike trail?
Wants to know if there's going to be
Yeah, I heard about the Ballard Bike Trail. I hope so. That we'll get a Ballard Bike Trail. I know we kept thinking that we were going to finish the Burke-Gilman Trail all the way over to without any interruption, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's still up in the air, unfortunately, after all these years.
If there's one more, let's do that. I want to make sure that there's some time for you to sign books and
Oh, yes. Oh, I have my special pen.
go to it. Actually, there are two. Go ahead, and then that one, and then we'll call this quits for a while.
Yeah, it was a bit late, but was there any rhyme or reason as to why so many council members have elected not to enter the race for a new term? Have you thought about that?
Check me, he's asking about the city council, and if there's a reason that, again, so many are choosing not to run.
Oh, I think possibly they've taken a poll, like I did. They found out that they couldn't win. I mean, that's a guess. I don't know. I haven't asked them. And I would say also that it is a very draining experience on the council, for all the fact that we had fun times doing oddball things like writing murder mysteries and possibly kicking up one's heels a little bit. It still means putting in about 14 to 16 hours some days. I mean, you get to the point where if the hearing goes on past 10 o'clock at night and you have been up since who knows what time meeting people in your office, well, you might be getting just a bit tired. It is very draining. And you also are, you know, your life is very public. You are expected to turn over any of your emails if somebody requests it. We believe in transparency in government, and believe me, there are lots of people who help you do that.
I don't doubt that. And finally,
Jean, hello, good to see you again. What was the piece of legislation that you most anguished over, that you were surprised did not turn out?
What I'm most anguished over?
Piece of
Legislation? Well, I think you know when we put in the paid sick leave, this was probably one of those times when I did have a bit of anguish. I knew that it was very, very important to do, but I lost a lot of my restaurateur friends at the time. One of them called me up and said, I'm sending you a check for $500, but don't ever ask for another penny. However, I took it. Mentioning no names, by the way.
there you go. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Jean Godden.